Larry, come on up. Our friends from Seclore are here. Let's see. Justin, you're the CRO, and Larry's the VP Global Strategy and Operations. Yes, did I get that right?
It's all right. No worries.
Yes. I'll introduce Larry. Larry's actually one of our customers.
You
We thought a couple of things. One, while a Chief Revenue Officer may not necessarily be the title you're familiar with when we start talking about cyber, one of your peers, having them join us in a conversation, I thought certainly would be helpful. And so Larry Wiggins is the Senior Vice President of the Cybersecurity Practice at GM Financial, also a customer. And so we'll talk a little bit about what it is that we do at Seclore, but more specifically what we wanted to do was frame the conversation. That was a scary session that we just heard. And so when you think about balancing data compliance and security, in certainly an interconnected world, I think it changes the framework, right? We heard from OpenText earlier, they also believe in securing data. But what I wanted to do is back up a little bit and frame the conversation. Oh, the slides are over here. There we go. And frame the conversation a bit so that we can have a dialogue and also take questions from you. So a couple of things. Maybe before we get started, if I can, quick show of hands, who's familiar with Seclore? Oh, this is fantastic. Well, thank you for that. It's always humbling to be in front of not only peers, but folks who are using your technology. So please, I hope you share throughout the sessions over the next couple of days. Was not expecting that, so that is fantastic. That being said, if you're not familiar with Seclore, we are on a mission to secure the world's most sensitive data assets. And so when we think about that, in today's conversation, we're going to talk about non-structured data. Specifically, we're going to talk about how organizations are going about this with all of the headlines that you continue to read every single day. And if we think about what that data is, right, it fuels our modern day business, and it's certainly on the move every single day. I know a lot of times we think about how do we secure the perimeter? How do we prevent people from getting to the data? At some point, we believe there's a world where we can talk about this notion of kind of a breach that may occur, but where the data that you're actually trying to get to is unusable. And certainly we can do that within our technology, and we'll talk a little bit more about that and how we frame that conversation. But as the data travels, think about all the places that this data may go, right? Whether it's our third-party suppliers, it's the supply chains themselves, we've got data in the cloud, we've got data in all sorts of SaaS applications, we've got data in file servers, right? This is data that we know intentionally and in some cases unintentionally must be passed from one party to the next. It is just a fact. It is how we do business. It's how we stay competitive. The notion of putting that perimeter around and investing in all the technologies, career-limiting move to not do those things, but that being said, we can't somehow take for granted the fact that these data, only by virtue of how we trade and transact data, does it actually have value. So protecting it, no matter where it travels, is absolutely essential. This is not moving, I don't think. There we go. So again, when we think about it beyond the edge of your network, and we also talk about it being beyond your control. It doesn't have to be the case where data is beyond your control. This is where Seclore comes in. This is the conversation we'll have. It's certainly why we engaged with GM Financial, and certainly why we hope to have conversations with you. When we go beyond your control, this is where a lot of the compliance and security gaps start to present themselves as bigger challenges than when we just kind of think about them within the perimeter of our own organizations. And we know all the acronyms, right? We hear them all the time. There's no shortage of headlines out there that we have to constantly pay attention to. And, I joke, but last night over dinner, Larry and I were, I guess last week, it was, it was probably Tuesday, Wednesday last week, we were talking about this conversation we were going to have. And I said, well, Larry, my guess is that there will be a time where over the next couple of days, we're going to hear a plethora of headlines that we can certainly talk about over the course of our time at Innovate. And the reality is that we all know, right? The same organization that was responsible for the MOVEit and the vulnerabilities associated to that just quietly released, hey, by the way, there's 8 more vulnerabilities in a different FTP service. You're going to have to worry about those things too. What's really, really scary about these things is this is not just if you've deployed the technology, but what your suppliers, what your third parties are deploying, and how that data, whether it's you exchanging data with them or them with other parties, your responsibility around compliance, data privacy, certainly security, extends well beyond certainly your organization. We saw it in another clip, I think maybe Friday or Saturday, where Cisco said, oh, by the way, firmware is now at risk based on different adversaries who now, if you're working with third parties and things along those lines, we have a different set of issues. These happen all the time. And so when we think about this idea of protecting your data, it's critically important that we think about it not just through the confines of they're getting into my organization and one of my employees has done something wrong, hasn't set the password properly. Those things absolutely happen. But on the flip side, even when we intentionally mean to exchange data from one organization to the next, one department to the next, we still are responsible for that same level of compliance. So with that, here are the things that we hear in the headlines all the time, whether it's the data theft, the regulatory. I think we can all agree that the human element, human error, constantly plagues us. It is effectively our Achilles heel. And so when we go out to protect an organization, when we think about what it is that we can do to help organizations, we have to assume people are going to get to the data. Now we have to create a means by which we can protect that data no matter where it travels. And so we'll talk a little bit about what we've done at Seclore, but more specifically, I asked Larry to maybe jump on stage, talk a little bit about what GM Financial is doing, specifically maybe the organization as a whole, and then it'd be great to just better understand, what are some of the things that your organization thinks about when it comes to compliance, security, and certainly different regulations that your organization has to deal with. Hopefully that's working.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Awesome. Sorry, Justin. So I am, Justin mentioned, the Strategy and Operations Officer at GM Financial. What that means is I control all of the security stack technologies, as well as threat and vulnerability management and incident response. And what we see more and more now that we've created our hard external shell of the network and protected all of our data internally is we are spending more of our incident response cycles with our third parties and understanding where they're having incidents and where they're having breaches and where they may have lost our data. And this past summer with Clop and Move It has been a really great case study in the limitations of what happens when your data leaves the environment. So, as we move to cloud, as we move to massive third parties, we lose control of that data. But, we've had standing rules in place for a long time now. Encrypt the data both on the channel and on the payload itself. But as soon as our vendor, as soon as our partner gets that information, first thing they do is decrypt it. And now we've at least got a trail of, okay, you are definitely the ones that lost the data because it was encrypted when we gave it to you. However, we haven't had a capability really to pull it back. And one of the things that we also found this summer, as we started dealing with that bottom one, the human error element, is GM Financial, as you may imagine, leases most of the vehicles for General Motors, which means that we are dealing with all manner of dealerships, customers, so on and so forth. And that means that we're emailing sensitive documents back and forth all day. And as it turns out, some of our call center reps have an occasion to mistype an email address or fat finger something. So we've started encrypting emails at the customer service level. And what that's allowed us to do with Seclore is actually pull them back. So we've had several incidents where we were emailing a dealership, and because of the amount of data, it was automatically encrypted, and we were able to pull that back and say, you can't have access to it anymore. So even though the dealership got it and unencrypted the payload, we were able to pull the data back out of their environment because they no longer had access rights to it.
Yeah, I think and this is something we see all the time. Another headlines, right? Just as just social or data points. When you think about, there was an article recently where the federal government, right, despite all the regulation they impose upon you, the reality is they make all the same mistakes and probably a lot more. But I think DoD was sending millions of emails to a .ml as opposed to .mil, M-I-L, and all these documents were errantly going to the wrong place, right? These are the sorts of challenges that we have despite all the CASB solutions, all the encryption you might deploy, DLP solutions, all of these different solutions. We continue to see these errant activities and sometimes intentional activities where, either bad actors or people do things to save away data and it gets used or misused in the wrong way. There's a lot of conversation around identity access management. These are all critical elements to, I think, our overall strategy. But at the end of the day, we still have the challenge where the people who you give access to misuse that access. And this is why we continue to help organizations, I think, extend beyond some of those technologies. If you will, I think you maybe hinted on it a little bit, but as we've introduced cloud and third parties and, last night we were talking about even Kubernetes, would love to understand over the last decade, what has changed in your thoughts around compliance and regulation? What really is top of mind, both inside your organization and maybe amongst your peers?
Yeah, so I think what's changed is the level of detail in regulation. So, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it wasn't very prescriptive, and now I see more and more regulations that are getting down to certainly encryption, but also calling out the need for UEBA, the need for EDR, the need for multiple controls that 10 and 15 years ago, they just kind of said, hey, protect your environment, and left it up to the security practitioners. So with that level of prescription, though, there's all manner of vagaries, and oftentimes to me, reading the regulation, it looks like one or more vendors has stepped in to assist with writing that regulation. That being said, as far as what's changed when it comes to protecting the environment, it's a lot of the same rules until you get to cloud. Cloud is a different beast only in so much as it's open by default. So on-prem, you deploy something and you've got a hard stop at a firewall or a hard stop at a network. And as long as you've got good partnerships with those teams, you're not going to inadvertently expose a server to the internet. There's a series of change records, change orders that have to go through.
Yeah.
Cloud, the developers can just help you out, and cloud service providers are definitely willing to help.
Yeah.
So the biggest thing, biggest shift there has been being proactive and really more education.
Love it. That may be a conversation over a glass of wine or something like that. But if you think about, I was reading an article, I think back in May, Proofpoint released about 62% of the people in this room, right, CISOs, people who are responsible for cybersecurity, are reading all the headlines, right? You're starting to see what the final word is and how material breaches have to be reported in a certain specified amount of time. The definition of material, obviously that's going to be hotly debated. But when I have the conversations, I'm sure you're having them as well. How's the CISO community dealing with this? What is the overarching theme? And again, this is probably a maybe two week, 2 month conversation. But would love to hear what you're hearing, at least in the DFW area or maybe amongst the rest of your peers.
Sure. I think the short answer is a lot of us are looking for raises. When you start talking about jail time and you start talking about legal consequences that you don't see across a lot of the other C-suite to date, outside of maybe the CEO and CFO where there's negligent fraud. The analogy that I used last night at dinner, and it's kind of my favorite, you never see counsel being threatened with jail time or prison for the company being sued. But we've got a very real risk as CISOs as to potentially be imprisoned or fined when there's an adversary at stake. So I think overall, industry-wide, there's going to have to be some pretty seismic shifts from the standpoint of right now the CISOs by and large go from your manager of InfoSec all the way up to your true C-suite CISOs. I think there's going to be a convergent. With that will come raises. But I also think there's an intersection with the current economy that's got to play out. But it's going to be curious to see how that SEC rule and who wants to take on that risk.
Yeah, 100%. So again, in the spirit of staying on time and certainly on schedule, thank you for that, Larry. Really appreciate some of the responses there. You know, again, we fundamentally believe at Seclore that we've got to assume that these breaches will continue to happen. It's unfortunate, but it's a reality that we all have to face. If and when those things happen, we have to make sure that you stay in control of your data, no matter where that travels, right? Whether that's third parties or third parties engaging with you, the level of accountability that comes with compliance, data privacy, and certainly security remain true. There is a world we fundamentally believe where a harmless breach is possible, right? Where you can have my asset, but no different than if that asset is in the bank and you can't do anything with it, it becomes worthless to you if you're not able to trade it or exchange it or hold people ransom for it. And so those are the type of areas that we continue to explore inside of Seclore, and we hope to talk to you over the next couple of days. With that, I think my time is over, at least as stated here. Thank you again, Larry, for certainly helping us talk a little bit about some of the conversations I'm sure we're having every day and certainly over the next couple of days. On behalf of Seclore, it's always a humbling experience to be able to work with each of you. You've got near impossible jobs, right? And regardless of what the SEC might say, the reality is they're probably next for the next breach anyway. And the reality is we'll continue to, I think, work in partnership with each and every one of you to see how we can certainly solve for some of these very big challenges as they get thrown at us certainly on a daily basis. So with that, thank you for your time. And we'll kind of go from there. I don't know if there's any questions, anything like that, but happy to take a few from the crowd. Go ahead, sir. Yeah. Yeah, I'll try to summarize the question just so everybody can hear it. But the question in a shorter format maybe is, what do we mean by being able to protect data as it travels to other organizations, right? Whether intentionally or unintentionally, what does it mean? What do we do within the product at Seclore in order to make sure that that data is always under our control? There's a few things that we do. One, we leverage some form of encryption, right? But we think about protecting the file, the data, the CAD document, the PDF, the email, whatever that document or whatever that file may be, we think about encrypting it. That's an easy one. Everybody does that to some extent. But beyond that, then we also provide some level of access control, meaning who can do what, where, when, and how, right? So what I mean by that is when I send this document out, how long can you have access to it? Can I geofence it so that in certain areas of the world, maybe you can't open it at all? You can't do anything with it when you're in some of these different locations. I can make it certainly time-bound, right? I can also prevent you from doing anything but opening and reading it, right? It could say, hey, you can open it, you can look at it, but you can't copy it. You can't forward it. You can't change it or edit it in any way. I might also deploy things like dynamic watermarking so that you know when I open this document, your name is on it, the time and date that you actually open the document, and if you're ever forward it, people understand the level of accountability and responsibility that goes. But ultimately, it means I can change it dynamically at any time. I may have decided that you're a trusted party, but 5 minutes later, I errantly sent it to the wrong person. You're no longer trusted. You weren't even the person I meant it to send it to. That's our ability to pull it back, and that's certainly some of the use cases that Larry just spoke to. On the flip side, it may be, hey, we worked with a third-party contractor. Maybe we had an employee who decided, I'm going to download all my files to my personal laptop because I'm just grabbing my pictures, but they also grab some material non-public information. They grab some sort of IP that you have, things like that. Well, when they leave, we can take those specific files, no matter if they're on their laptop, sitting in their Gmail cloud account or some Dropbox, or it doesn't matter where it sits. That's your ability to revoke or change your mind and pull all of that information back and make it completely useless to that user. Does that help? Larry, I don't know if you've had different use cases that
No, you hit both of ours. The ability to pull back that encryption key, and that. So part of it is you allow one of the rights that you can give or take away is the ability to remove the encryption entirely. So I can give somebody full access, at which point they can remove that encryption entirely, and then they've got the document permanently. But short of that, I can give them access to decrypt it, to view it, to read it, to print it, to share it with somebody else, and that encryption will follow the file wherever it goes. So if I come back at a later date, revoke the keys, and you no longer have access.
Yeah, and the important part is we know that if you allowed for your employees or humans in general, we would all make the same mistakes. You may apply the wrong rule sets. We've dealt with that, right? Which is we call this notion of federated policy adoption, if you will. That may not be the technical name for it, but at the end of the day, through all of the other policies that you've configured, whether they're your DLP, your CASB, any other classification products, whether it be Microsoft or anything else that you're leveraging, the reality is we will take all of those policies and deploy them into those, apply them to the data set or the documents themselves so that your users don't make flaws in the way that they categorize, classify, or whatever the case may be, those said documents. It's a great question, and thank you for asking. Any other questions? I'm now jumping into other people's time, so anybody else? Thank you very much. Again, we very much appreciate it. Thank you, sir.